Hi, it's Gary, and in today's technique video, I'm going to tell you about the most valuable piece of wood I have in the workshop. It's not a back or a side set, it's this little piece of wood, wheat purfling. And the reason why it's so valuable is because it's so labor intensive to make, and I'll take you through the process of making some. In general, purflings are these purely decorative components in guitars. They're these auxiliary pieces of wood that are usually next to bindings. So here we have the binding in black, which serves a protective role. And then we have these colored stripes. These are the purflings that create just a nice artistic touch. And I also have some here up on the top. And purflings can come in different forms, like wheat purfling is just a fancier marquetry form of purflings. And in my guitars, I have a fair amount of it. For example, in the rosette, in the end graft, in the center seam, even in the head. And I just think that they're really elegant pieces of little bits of art. And one of the reasons why I'm a fan of wheat purfling is that I'm a plant biochemist by training. And when I was a grad student at Washington State University, the school was just surrounded with hundreds and hundreds of miles of wheat because it was a big wheat producing region. And so it's a challenge to make, but well worth it. So let's start by going to the drawing board. First, I want to gratefully acknowledge one of my Lutherie heroes, Greg Byers, who described this method in an issue of American Lutherie. So if you want to do it yourself, I highly recommend that you go look at that article. Many of you might be familiar with a marquetry pattern known as herringbone, which is also found in some Taurus guitars. And it starts with this central spine that has these rays coming off, and the rays intersect at the spine. So what you end up having is something that looks like a fishbone. Well, this wheat purfling is a refinement of that technique, and in wheat purfling, typically the rays come off at a lower angle. And on my wheat purfling, I like to make it asymmetric, so that the spines don't intersect. And I also like to give it some leaves coming off of the central spine. And I also add a little bit of shading using a different colored veneer between these spines. So that's how it gives it the illusion that it's a head of a wheat. And in order to do this, we'll do some gymnastics with cutting at different angles and re-gluing and reassembling. The way this works is we're going to take veneers and glue them into layers to create kind of a plywood. And from that, then we're going to cut at an angle sections. And so what happens is we're going to generate a bunch of these sections. So by repeating this cut, we'll generate a bunch of these parallelograms. And if we duplicate these parallelograms and glue them together, what we'll get is a log that if we make another side and flip it around and move it side by side to the other half, you could start to see that this wheat pattern would form, especially if we took another veneer and glue it down the middle. So that you could see if we took slices, what would happen is in this slice, you can already see the wheat pattern forming. So that's what we're going to do. And so let's go into the workshop now and start gluing some veneers. On the workbench, I have all the veneers I need to construct both opposing halves of the pattern. I have white, rust, and black. The black is going to serve as the void between the head of the wheat and the leaves. I'm using a synthetic glue, Type Bond 2, which is also waterproof, so that the purfling won't fall apart if I need to steam bend it in the future. As you can see, it's a lot of mindless gluing, repetitive, and each half of the pattern has 19 layers. So I'll need to do that twice because I have two asymmetric halves around the central shaft. And that asymmetry will give the pattern a very natural look in the end, because if you look at wheat closely, it's not symmetric. Once I have both halves completed of the basic pattern, then I cut them in half and then glue them together just to build up the layers. As in a lot of guitar building, the overall strategy to gain efficiency is to spend a lot of time at once to build up a lot of material. And in this case, it's a pretty arduous process, but in the end, I'll have enough material to make about 40 guitars. Now with these assemblies, I'm going to further cut them in half so that they're more manageable, and then move on to what's probably the most important step in the whole process, and that's to cut the 11-degree angle in these pieces. So I have this jig that's set at 11 degrees, and then I slip it on the bandsaw and make the cuts. Okay, what I have now are a bunch of parallelograms, and they came off of the bandsaw. And originally, they looked like this. And now I'm going to glue them in this orientation. If I glue them together and repeat that, then after I do that, then if I take a very thin strip off of the top, if you look at it from the side, it will look like a head of a wheat or the leaves coming off of a central shaft. And repeating that for the other side, then if you glue them together, they'll look like the classic wheat head or the leaves coming off of the shaft. So let's go ahead and glue them together now. So now looking directly above, we have these two asymmetric patterns. And if I take this veneer to represent the center stalk and I line up the patterns, I think you can see now that what we'll have is the head and a couple of leaves on either side of the stalk. So now what I need to do is just slice some very thin strips on either side of the stalk and glue it together. The next step is to thin the pieces to a very uniform thickness. In my case, I use 0.75 millimeters. And I use a drum sander, which is a spinning drum that has abrasive on it. Now we're getting to the very end, and it's getting pretty exciting, but you can see at this point it's become very valuable material. So what we have to do at this point is we have the two halves that we're going to glue to this central veneer, which will represent the central stock. And then I'm just going to laminate two black layers on the outside to give it some integrity. Just do one final check to make sure the alignment of the two halves looks good. I'll clean it up for you with the plane. So that's it. That's how this technique is done. Thanks for your interest in watching. It's one of the few techniques in guitar building that is purely aesthetic, but a really great tradition in our craft. What you saw in the last 10 minutes took the period of about 3.5 days, but well worth it. And I'm going to leave you with one example of how this wheat purfling can be used in combination with another type of purfling for an inlay in a back. So enjoy and see you on the next one.